Good morning, all gathered at this time. Let us bow in reverence to the giver of life as we go through this prayer this morning. Oh, for 1,000 tongues to sing my great Redeemer's praise, the glories of my God and King, the triumphs of his grace. Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, for he is good, for his mercy endureth forever. Oh, that men would praise the Lord for his goodness and for his wonderful works to the children of men. Praise the Lord. Heavenly Father and O God, I come to thee in the Holy Spirit through the Lord Jesus Christ, thy only beloved Son, in whom thou art well pleased, with praise, honor, glory, majesty, and thanksgiving. We thank thee for waking us this morning in newness of life, in our right minds, conscious of our being and our surroundings. We thank thee for the safekeeping of our household. We thank thee for knowledge, for wisdom. We thank thee for journeying mercies as we travel by land, by sea, and by air with thanksgivings. O merciful Father and our God, we give thee thanks for guidance and for thy protection during the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic activities. O Lord, we give thanks to thee for the health services, for medical science, with the knowledge, the wisdom, and the skills employed and rendered daily in the fight against the pandemic. Heavenly Father and our God, I bring to thee the frontline workers, rendering their professional service daily with family sacrifices, with country above self. I pray for their wellness going forward. My gracious God and Heavenly Father, thy name we praise with thanksgivings for the duration of the 2021 hurricane season, without the loss of life, nor damages to property of any magnitude. We thank thee for the rain, the sunshine, the wind, and the earthquake, reminding us that thou art the God, thou art the creator of earth, sea, and sky, with all seasons. O Lord, I bring to thee this honorable house, the honorable Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of this Assembly, that they will conduct the business of this Assembly in accordance with the principles, the rules, and the orders, with fairness and justice at all times and to all concerned. My Lord and my God, I bring to thee these elected servants of this honorable house, in the quest to serve the people of the Federation with distinction, with justice, with fairness, putting country above self, seeking your guidance in all their doings. Lord, I pray that these elected servants of this Assembly will embrace the words according to the Apostle Paul, to the Colossians. And whatsoever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, giving thanks to God and for the Father by him. And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily as to the Lord and not as unto men. O Lord, I pray that the matters presented and discussed today will be to the benefit of the citizens of the Federation going forward. I pray for guidance and respect for all members of this Assembly, that they will conduct themselves with all prudence and in accordance with the rules, the regulations, and the orders of this Assembly. These things with your favors, O Lord, I ask with thanksgivings in our Savior's precious name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Pastor Anthony. Please be seated. Yes, Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Mr.
Hamilton.
Speaker, good morning, Mr. Speaker. I rise and I want to draw your attention to item O on the order paper, where 3 bills are listed for second reading, and to urge for an amendment to the order paper to remove the first bill, which is the Drugs Prevention and Abatement of the Misuse and Abuse of Drugs Amendment Act 2021, which had its first reading on 30 September 2021. Mr. Speaker.
I'm sorry, could you kindly the proposed amendment? I'm sorry.
Yes, that the bill be amended, that the order paper be amended by removing the Drugs Prevention and Abatement of Misuse and Abuse of Drugs Amendment Act 2021, which had its first reading on the 30th of September 2021. It's down for a second reading, so that what will remain will be the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021 and the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021.
The question is that the first item on the public business, the Drugs Prevention and Abatement of Misuse and Abuse of Drugs Amendment Act 2021, be removed from this order paper. Those in favor? Those against, the ayes have it. That item has been removed.
Confirmation of minutes.
Minutes are deferred.
Messages from the Governor General.
There are no messages from the Governor General.
Announcements by the Speaker.
Honourable members, I have a few announcements. Well, first of all, I would like to welcome members of the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association to our sitting this morning. I can see a few of you in the audience. Welcome. Relatedly, in commemoration of Youth Month, the St. Kitts National Youth Parliament Association, SCANIPA, will be hosting a mock sit-in here in this National Assembly on Monday, November 29, 2021 at 9 a.m. So I commend the Youth Parliament Association and your continuing efforts to promote the youth, or to do things that would, to continue to promote the well-being and the best interests of our youth of our nation. There will also be a special sit-in of the National Assembly on Thursday, 25th November 2021, 6:30 p.m. to award the 25 most remarkable teens. This is an annual event, and so this year it will be held again at the Rivers of Living Water Christian Center, November 25th. We look forward to that event, as it is actually a sit-in, a formal sit-in of Parliament, but it falls into the category of a special sit-in of Parliament. Again, with respect to the National Youth Parliament Association, I take pride in commending Mr. Darian Connor and Mrs. Joanna Bradley of that association for their recent participation in the virtual Commonwealth Youth Parliament 2021 debate that was held on the 18th to the 22nd of October 2021. So commendations again to Mr. Darren Connor and Miss Joanna Bradley of the St. Kitts National Youth Parliamentary Association. Those are my announcements.
Presentation of papers and reports from committees. Petitions. Government notices. Unofficial notices. Questions. Request for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on matters of urgent public importance. Statements by ministers.
I recognize the Honourable Prime Minister to present a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise with your leave to provide an update regarding the government's previously announced discounted VAT rate day. I am pleased to announce that my government, in furtherance of our commitment to bring relief to the citizens and residents of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, and after discussions with the Chamber of Industry and Commerce, has established Thursday the 16th and Saturday the 18th December 2021 as the reduced VAT rate days. I repeat, after consultations with the Chamber of Industry and Commerce and the Financial Secretary on behalf of the government, we have designated Thursday the 16th December and Saturday the 18th December 2021 as the reduced VAT rate days. Consequent upon this decision, I have instructed the Accountant General to take the necessary measures to bring forward the date for the payment of salaries to all public officers in December, wages to all government auxiliary employees, and of course the monthly pension to all government pensioners. The date for the payment of the salaries, wages, and pensions for December has been brought forward to Wednesday, the 15th December 2021. In other words, we are paying early so that all government employees can have the opportunity to participate fully in the 2 VAT days if they so require. The payroll of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis for the month of October 2021 recorded a total of 6,327 individuals, comprising of 3,890 salaried or monthly paid employees, 1,078 weekly paid employees or government auxiliary employees, and 1,359 pensioners. And the total payroll disbursement for October was recorded at $22,292,536.11. So the government payroll burden is substantial at 22.3 million at last count in October, and consequently over 10,000 persons benefiting from the government payments. This is substantial. We anticipate that our VAT rate reduction days will drive consumer sales and lead to improved economic activity in the Federation during December, while simultaneously allowing customers to enjoy more affordable goods. We urge the Chamber's membership and the wider business community to provide their customers with special bargains and discounts, not only on the 2 VAT discount rate days, but for the rest of December, so that more of our people can have a most enjoyable Christmas, notwithstanding the shadow of COVID-19. With respect to those on STEP, we have not left them out. And so, on the STEP program, we have 2,830 persons. They too will be paid on the 15th December 2021. The STEP program then has been reduced from a high of about 4,000 plus to 2,830. The STEP payroll disbursement for October, was approximately $4.3 million. So all in all, we're talking about some $26.6 million in payments to employees, hovering around 13,000 plus. To ensure our approach is inclusive, I have instructed the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Sustainable Development and the Accountant General to bring forward the date for the payment of about 5,000 plus beneficiaries on that program from the 30th of December 2021, as was originally carded, to Wednesday the 15th. We are therefore attempting to ensure, as I said, the benefit is shared among as many persons as possible, and everyone then on the government payroll in one form or the other, whether pensioner, salaried or weekly or PAP workers, will in fact benefit from the discounted VAT rate days. The burden with respect to PAP payments as of October was put at $2.7 million. Again, I want to commend the staff at the Ministry of Finance and of course the Chamber for their collaboration and cooperation, and a significant initiative that the government has taken on the very difficult times to reduce VAT from a high of 17% to a low of 5% on merchandise. It was a direct intention there was to ensure that at this time, food and other merchandise are made as affordable to the largest number of persons. That is what we are intending to have happen. And by bringing forward the salaries, the payment of salaries, wages, and other benefits, we ensure again that more people can take advantage of what should be lower prices. And we are asking the business community, small and large businesses, to, if you can't match the government with such a significant reduction in your goods, certainly to go some way with special bargains and discounts being made available. All these are efforts of the government to ensure that our recovery can be speedier and that we give the economy the necessary impetus so that we can move more quickly out of the shadow of COVID-19. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, for indulging me. May I please you, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Prime Minister and Member for St. Christopher 7. Next slide. I recognize the Honourable Member for Nevis 11 with a ministerial statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and with your indulgence, I rise to make a brief statement pertaining to the Ministry of Agriculture et al., a ministry that falls within my responsibility. Mr. Speaker, as I rise to make this statement, I make it with the backdrop that we are still, of course, dealing with matters pertaining to COVID-19 in all areas and in all sectors. And of course, the Ministry and Department of Agriculture continue to grapple with the difficulties that have been presented during this particular pandemic. But of course, there are no excuses to be made at this point in time, but rather to report on some of the efforts that we have been making in this particular ministry and department to ensure that we are providing that transition out of COVID-19 and into a much more desirable situation once we're able to exit this particular pandemic. But Mr. Speaker, I will say to this Honourable House and to the general public at large that the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Marine Resources, in collaboration with the Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, has embarked upon the development of a new National Agriculture Strategic Plan. Now, this 10-year plan is meant to be a blueprint to transform the agricultural sector after a process of consultation with all our stakeholders to ensure that the decisions that are made are inclusive and consistent with what is required from a national level. Over the past 20 years, Mr. Speaker, the sector's contribution to the GDP has declined from about 2% in 2000 to a mere 0.7% in 2018. During that same period, the food import bill has steadily increased, amounting to just about US $76 million, or 80% of the overall food requirements up to that point in time, or that period in time. The transition from agriculture to other emerging economic sectors have proven to be difficult for some of our farmers. Additionally, the linkage between agriculture and tourism, for example, remains weak, and 20% of the economically active population still depend on agriculture nonetheless. This reality, coupled with the levels of agricultural production and productivity, has had a social impact on our agricultural community that depends on agriculture for its livelihood. Further, I'd like to state, Mr. Speaker, that there are several factors that we have, we are acknowledging, have contributed to the level of agricultural production and productivity in which we are very much concerned about. Some of these factors that we have certainly identified that have been affecting the overall growth of the sector include, for example, the degradation of land, soil, water, and coastal and marine resources, particularly due to climate change and natural hazards. And some of these natural hazards include some of the intense storms that we have received in recent years, drought, sea level rise, hurricanes, and so forth. Additionally, we also see that there are difficulties being posed and difficulties that have to be mitigated as we continue to develop this sector with certain things such as seasonal freshwater intrusion into our seasonal fresh water availability, coupled with inadequate rainfall and stormwater harvesting and storage that create that difficulty for our farmers in terms of having readily access to fresh water. These are some of the things, Mr. Speaker, we are trying to address. And in addressing these particular concerns and difficulties, that is why we would have implemented back in September of this year our St. Kitts and Nevis Agricultural Transformation and Growth Strategy 2022 to 2031. Because of the challenges that we have been facing over the years, we realized that we would have had to adopt a brand new approach to agriculture and how we practice agriculture in the Federation. Of course, we intend to, over the next 10 years, to address some of the concerns with availability of arable lands. We also intend to implement policies that are coherent and consistent with what we want to achieve in the agricultural sector. And these are some of the policies we'll have to ensure that we are, of course, addressing environmental issues, trade issues, adopting and implementing that linkage between tourism and, of course, agriculture. And indeed, what is most important to our farmers is the access to financing to expand and upgrade their agricultural practices. Now, these are some of the issues that we will definitely be addressing in this particular strategy. In terms of some of the additional difficulties that we have identified, we realize that there is some weakness in the business structure and organization of some of our farmers and fisher folks. And indeed, through a collective approach, we intend to improve some of these difficulties or improve on some of these weaknesses. Mr. Speaker, of course, we intend to adopt various digital and innovative ways of conducting agriculture moving forward. Indeed, we have been stressing over the last 18 months thereabout the importance of protected agriculture, and that involves the introduction or expansion of what we term as greenhouse technology, shade house technology, being the main catalyst, I believe, can be what we can achieve through greenhouse technology, in that we realize with all of the difficulties we've been having with climatic changes, the reduction in availability to land space, we believe that more can be achieved in greenhouse technology and shade house technology as against the regular open field farming. So we are placing significant emphasis on that type of technology moving forward because of what we understand can be achieved through the prolific nature of such production. So, Mr. Speaker, I did indicate that on the 30th of September 2021, we would have launched this particular growth strategy that we intend to use as our roadmap and our guide moving forward. We would have done so via virtual means, and it was done in the presence of our farmers, our fisher folks, agro-processors, the business sector, ministry officials and other line ministries such as trade, education, tourism, environment, just to name a few. And of course, we would have had the presence of the regional or sub-regional FAO representative, Dr. Renata Clark, who is spearheading this effort through the efforts of the Food and Agriculture Organization, and we want to thank them for their continued support to the sector here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Indeed, we have done quite a number of things since then, at least between the 25th and the 27th of October. We would have had various workshops to gather information and also to gain the consensus of the working groups so that there is buy-in with this particular strategy. And of course, the aim overall is to ensure that we're attaining food security and sustainability here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. Mr. Speaker, I did speak about some of the challenge that we've been having in agriculture. I just want to touch on one such challenge that we have sought to mitigate in recent weeks. And indeed, we have had, over the past 4 months for sure, some difficulties at the Department of Agriculture with respect to the procurement of feed from our regional suppliers. We have experienced issues with the quality of feed in some cases, availability, like I said, from our suppliers. But of course, the main supplier that we would have had, we would have been using over the last 10 years or more, would have been our suppliers out of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And of course, they would have had some problems with their feed mill there. This would have led to some closures, of course, of the entire operation. And of course, coupled with the fact that there were some supply chain issues that would have created difficulties in them receiving the necessary raw material to produce feed for animals, that is poultry and various livestock. Those issues were further compounded, of course, with Hurricane Ida, which would have had landfall on the southern portion of the United States, Louisiana and those states. And indeed, over the last couple of weeks for sure, there have been some actual relief being had whereby supplies would have started again and production would have also restarted. But the difficulties that were created with this shortage would have led to some issues here locally whereby our poultry farmers would have had some losses. We would have had a reduction in the production of eggs, for example. And I will say at this point in time, which is commendable on our part, that the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, over the years, or over the last 5 years at least, have been self-sustainable in the production of eggs. And only during December or Carnival time, when you have that onslaught, so to speak, of persons coming home to celebrate with us, where you'll have an increase in demand, whereby that demand would have to be met by importation of eggs during the month of December. But I will say for 11 months, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis have been self-sustainable in the production of eggs. And that must be commendable. We look at various sectors or various areas within agriculture where we can improve and build on for years to come. And that is one such sector that we do believe we have done an excellent job in ensuring that we are providing the protection to our poultry farmers. And we want them to continue in their pursuit of excellence in terms of ensuring that they're producing and producing at a level that can keep the importation of eggs to a minimum into the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. So what we have done, Mr. Speaker, is that we have actually implemented an initiative, a Farmers Assistance Initiative program, whereby we are assisting our farmers through the reduction of the price of feed from the 5th of November all the way down to the 31st of December. This is to help them to recover some of the losses that they would have had after we would have had the difficulties with the disruption in the supply chain. So they are now receiving 50% off of the cost of feed for poultry, for rabbits, livestock, other livestock that depend on the type of feed that we sell at the Department of Agriculture. So throughout the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, we are doing what we can in terms of mitigating some of these challenges and to ensure that we continue to provide that relief to our farmers so that they can continue to produce for us and to ensure that we can rely on them as well. So the estimated cost of what we would lose or what the government will lose in the process in terms of revenue will be approximately $200,000. That is significant, Mr. Speaker, and I want our farmers to be cognizant of the fact that this government continues to work for their behalf, on their behalf, and for their betterment, and will continue to do what is necessary through our assistance program that we intend to continue to pursue on their behalf, and to ensure that agriculture producers are producing as we know they can and as we expect them to as well. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to, in wrapping up, thank all of the persons within the Ministry and Department of Agriculture, the Permanent Secretary, Mr. Ron Dublin Collins, who continue to do an excellent job in managing the affairs of the Ministry and Department of Agriculture. I want to commend him publicly for his efforts and to commend him for spearheading such a an important task of transitioning agriculture from where it once was to the levels that we are expected to attain over the next 5 years, 10 years, and beyond. Because the platform which we are building now is to be that platform upon which we can build agriculture into a sustainable sector. I also want to commend the director, the chief veterinary officer, all of the supervisors, workers, and everyone who contribute to the overall growth and development of the sector within the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. So with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I thank you for your indulgence, and may it please you, sir.
Thank you, Honorable Alexis Jeffers, member for Nevis 11. Those are the parishes of St. James and St. Thomas, Nevis. Any other statements? Next item, please.
Personal explanations. Motions relating to the business of the National Assembly and moved by a minister. Public business. Bills second reading.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker.
Yes, you're recognized, Honorable Member for Nevis 9.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I didn't want to talk to myself, so I'm happy you recognize me now. Mr. Speaker, it is a pleasure to be here. Thank you, and good morning to you, and good morning to the House. Good morning to colleagues, and of course, members of the gallery, and those who are viewing and listening via various media houses. In the absence of the Honourable Minister of Tourism, Mr. Speaker, I've been asked to lead the debate in relation to the bill that is short entitled Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021. I therefore seek leave, Mr. Speaker, to have the bill read a second time.
Yes.
So I continue my debate, right?
The question is...
Yes.
The question is that the bill entitled the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021 be read a second time. Those in favour? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, that would mark the start of the debate on that particular bill. I joked to the leader of government business this morning that he had given me the shortest bill ever introduced in the Parliament. This bill is really just 3 paragraphs, Mr. Speaker, and I get to them shortly. The bill seeks, Mr. Speaker, to amend the Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, which is Chapter 15.06 of the laws of St. Christopher and Nevis. And the bill, as I've indicated, is shortly entitled Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021. It would have received its first reading in this National Assembly on the 30th of September 2021. And we have come back now, as is the custom, to have a first reading and allow the bill an opportunity for those in the public and stakeholders to review and to comment. We have come back now, Mr. Speaker, hopefully, to debate this bill and have it passed into law. The amendment to the Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, it seeks to clearly provide for a restriction on the tinting of a windscreen and limiting such tinting to no more than the top 10 inches of the windscreen at 35% luminosity. Mr. Speaker, let me try and explain what luminosity means. The restrictions on the amount of visible light being transmitted into a car are defined and measured in percentages. These different percentages are the minimum amount of light that should be able to penetrate through the glass. A higher percentage of luminosity means that the tint is lighter. A lower tint percentage of luminosity means that the tint is darker. In the Federation, a minimum of 35% of light must be able to pass through the tinted glass. Mr. Speaker, the tinting of the entire windscreen at 35% luminosity may limit the amount of light that enters into a motor vehicle and can actually make it difficult for the driver to see the street in certain circumstances. Such limited vision may lead to the occurrence of accidents or even the loss of life. So the first point that I make in relation to this proposed amendment is that it is a safety measure. It is designed to ensure that driving is safer and that our drivers using our roadways are driving in as safe an environment as we can create. And basically, by seeking to limit the tinting that one can put on the windscreen, it seeks, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that a driver always has untrammeled visibility of the road. Mr. Speaker, the second aspect to this has to do with security. Not just the security of the personnel, as I have outlined initially, but security more generally, more broadly defined. The tinting of the entire windscreen, as we know, may obscure the view inside the vehicle, with the result sometimes that law enforcement officers may be unable to determine who is at the driver's seat, who is inside the vehicle, or what is taking place inside the vehicle. And we all understand that it is necessary sometimes for our police officers or law enforcement officers to be able to make a very quick assessment of the level of risk associated with individuals who might be in a vehicle. That measure, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is also designed as a security measure to assist in this government's ongoing efforts to ensure the safety and security of our population. It is no secret that this government has been committed, Mr. Speaker, to a safer and more secure St. Kitts and Nevis. And these measures are designed to ensure not only that our drivers are safer, but also that we have an added measure of security insofar as our police and law enforcement officials are concerned. We can well, Mr. Speaker, imagine that in the context of a traffic stop, it is important for the police to be able to identify very quickly who's inside the vehicle. And of course, if they can't see inside the vehicle, then they are at a decided disadvantage. And we're trying to ensure that the police are not compromised in any way and that our national security is not compromised in any way. Mr. Speaker, what then does this bill seek to do? In terms of its provisions, it is, as I said, quite short. Section 1 simply recites that it is the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Act 2021. Section 2 interpretation simply tells us that the act to which it refers means the Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 15.06. And Section 3, which is the only substantive section, it says that the principal act, that is the Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Chapter 15.06, is amended in Section 62 by replacing subsection 5 as follows. Every motor vehicle other than a motorcycle or agricultural tractor shall be fitted with a windscreen that provides ample protection to the driver of the motor vehicle, and the windscreen shall A, be kept in such condition as to allow an unobstructed view of the road at the front of the vehicle, and B, not be tinted more than 10 inches from the top of the windscreen for the purpose of providing protection as a sun visor, and that tinting shall be in accordance with the provisions of subsection 6, which is of course the 35%. So, Mr. Speaker, if I can break down in simple terms what is being proposed, is that your windscreen, the only tint that would be allowed on it would be 35 inches from the top. 10 inches from the top, at 35% luminosity. 10 inches from the top, so that you can have that strip of tint to provide some measure of protection from the sun. But your view as a driver has to be unimpeded and unobstructed, and also it has to be clear to law enforcement that they can see inside the vehicle at all times to determine who's driving and who might be inside that vehicle as a passenger. The passage of the bill, therefore, will allow for a 10-inch eyebrow at 35% luminosity. And that small strip of tint on the windscreen will ensure that the driver has sufficient visibility of the surroundings to properly navigate. The eyebrow level should also provide some protection from the sunlight. We feel, Mr. Speaker, that this is an important safety measure for the protection of the public, and I accordingly wish this bill safe passage through this honourable House. May it please you.
Thank you, Honourable Mark Grantley, member for Nevis 9. I now recognize the Honourable Attorney General, Vincent Byron Jr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise to second the motion and to lend support to the move of the bill, the member for Nevis 9, who has so eloquently laid out what this bill is about. The bill is a very short bill, as he has explained, and it is intended to provide for the safety and security of all of our citizens, those who drive, use motor vehicles, as well as those pedestrians and others who use our roadways. As he has said, the bill is intended to ensure that what has become an increasing mischief on our roads, where individuals have taken upon themselves to cover the windscreens of their vehicles, to dark them out, so no one can see inside. It adds two problems. One, it lays to the drivers of those vehicles to put themselves at jeopardy, as well as those who other users of the road at night, in rain, and other ways, because the screen is so darkened that you do not always clearly see what is happening. And so it is a safety precaution that is being implemented with this very short, I dare say simple, but very important amendment to the Vehicles and Road Traffic Bill. The move of the bill also made a second point, and he was very clear, very lucid in this, and that is that it provides for those who do national security to be able to observe, if needs be, those who are driving vehicles. Vehicles should not be darkened up so you can't see inside the vehicle, so that people can do mischief from within a vehicle and get away with it because you don't know who drives it. And so it's a very simple, short bill, a very clear bill that we have been asked, proposed to us, and we find it to be commended by those in national security, that we ensure that it leads to the safety of our people and it leads to security. So again, with those few words, Mr. Speaker, I want to support the move of the bill and wish this bill safe passage in this honourable House. As it may please you.
Thank you, Honourable Attorney General, for firstly seconding the bill and making your presentation. I recognize the honourable member opposite, Senator opposite, Madam Joyal Clark.
Oh, thank you. Good morning, Mr. Speaker, and good morning to everyone gathered here with us. Before I lend support to the bill, I want to start first by acknowledging the youth parliamentarians here with us today. For me, it's a bit uncanny, this moment in particular, because I remember one of my first youth parliament sessions was actually a debate on the Vehicle Safety Act, or the Vehicle and Road Traffic Act, and the use of seatbelts. And now we are here with youth parliamentarians observing us actually debating and amending said bills. So I just feel it was something to acknowledge and to remind you that what you're doing now will serve you in 10 years when you take our positions, which we look forward to. It is always important, Mr. Speaker, that as we engage in our roles as legislators, that we factor in relevance and timeliness of certain bills, as well as the overall intention of the bill in terms of advancing the business of the government. And I say this because of three key points I want to make while providing support. No, we cannot dare question the amendment to the bill which seeks to improve vehicular safety and improve the policing of commuters. It's very significant. Some may say that a bill like this pales in comparison to key legislative amendments which require our urgent attention. It's true, because when you do your research and you speak to members of the general public, we're always faced as legislators, why this bill? There's so many other important things that we have to discuss and debate. But I want to say no, that even as I may feel that, sometimes we really need to question what bills we bring and the relevance of the bill, I want to bring this bill and its relevance as it relates to vehicle safety, even climate change, and the tinting of vehicles. Now, as usual, the bills are always pretext by it's short or it's non-controversial, and I really sincerely hope that that is not a descriptor which is used to say don't perform your due diligence or don't contribute or don't question too many things in the bill. But I have just a few clarifying questions that may be needed so that the wider public comes on board with our amendment today, such as, and this is basically statistics, how many accidents have been as a direct result of the visor, the tinting, being too low? We need people to understand that, yes, it is a security issue, but here it is. We have recorded these many accidents, and now we are saying it is imperative that we improve road safety through this bill. How many criminals have gotten away with a crime because the visor was too low? That's critical, because people may think that we're just here trying to harass them into moving the visor from 12 inches to 10 inches or removing the entire tint from the front of the windscreen. And how much would such an amendment improve the policing efforts of commuters? That's a question that was asked. Now, I did a little reality check because it's my nature to research and to use science and statistics to inform my positions in lending support to the bill. We have to confirm that there are two issues here, as was rightly pointed out. Those persons who have their entire screen tinted beyond the 35%, which makes it very difficult to see in their vehicles. And secondly, those persons who currently have visors, but they are longer than the 10 inches. These are the two discrepancies, because people have been asking, so does that mean if I have a visor now, I'm going to be stopped by the police and it's going to be measured, and if it is longer than 10 inches, let's say it's 11 inches, or it's 12 inches, am I going to be forced to remove the visor. It's about $40. I did the research. It's very simple to some people, but $40 is not simple to everybody. So we want to make that lucidly clear, whether or not police will now be stopping you and checking that visor length, or we're stopping the persons with the full screens covered. Additionally, this is another important reality check which people have brought to me, and I am one who experienced it personally. Have you ever really taken a drive to the western side of the island in the late summer months when the sun sets directly in the west, which is directly in the middle of the road, driving from Parsons along Whitegate? It's a very slow moving traffic because you cannot see, even with your visor at 12 inches. But people will have to adjust. The people of St. Kitts and Nevis have also said, remember, when you ask us to remove the visor to 10 inches, there are some vehicles where the passenger side of the vehicle is beyond the 35%. There are some vehicles where it's clear at the front, the back passenger side of the vehicle is beyond the 35%. So there needs to be a complete rectification of how we approach tinting of vehicles. Another argument from a resident was, listen, we went to COP26 to discuss climate change. And everybody knows that tinting your vehicle is critical to energy consumption. When you don't have a tint on your vehicle, you use more air conditioning. When you use more air conditioning, you burn more gas. And the gas prices as they are, it's going to make things problematic. So we must make sure we temper the expectations of Kittitians when it comes to this visor rule. And finally, I want to also say that sometimes when we bring a legislation, and this legislation is really for effective policing and for safety. So there's no problem in lending to support to a bill which speaks to this. But bring the data so that there can be widespread acceptance of why such an amendment is so critical at a time when legislation that really would be critical for the survival of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis has not been brought to this national house. We need more data. We need to understand how many criminals have gotten away, how many accidents have been a result of the entire screen being tinted, and further, if we are going to be stopping persons who have, because I actually went and stood on the side of the road several days for an hour and looked at how many vehicles passed with the full screen tinted, very few, and how many vehicles passed with the visor, the majority. Then I went further and measured all the visors in the community, all the visors parked in the school that I teach, asked other persons to do the same. And on average, the visor is about 12 inches. So I have to tell people, is this going to be a ticketable offense? Are you going to be stopped now for the 12 inches? Or is that okay? Do you have to now go and rectify to 10 inches? Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Senator Opposite, Joel Clark. Are there any other contributions?
Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise not to tarry long, but to add words of support to the mover of this important bill, which deals, among other things, with safety issues and how we ensure that the police and law enforcement in general will have all the support that they need to do their work. The mover spelled out why this particular bit of legislation is required. There is no contention that it is important. There is no contention with issues of safety. Yes, we have come a long way from that period when we had shoots out almost every day. The evidence is that the majority of these cases involve tinted vehicles. It would be nice to say how many accidents were vehicles involved were tinted. That doesn't change the reality. It is the lived reality of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis that we are addressing here. The need for improved safety, the need to ensure that at least not even one incident would occur. And to go to the question with the member opposite posed, and to speak then in terms of a matter that could help to prevent loss of life in the context of a triviality is to miss the big picture of what this bill is. So when the senators speak of bills, and there are more important bills, I don't know any more important bill than one that could save people's life. And this is what this bill is. All of us may want to cherry pick about what legislation should come, and clearly we heard none that should take priority over this. And so I want to say that I support the bill, and it is timely. It is timely because we continue to have traffic accidents and deaths. It is timely because we are getting into the busy period of the year leading to Carnival and Christmas activities. And there's no time like now. And so we come to deal with this particular matter. And part of the answer which she seeks, if it were to be factual, could only come by and large. You see, when somebody drives up in a Pokeon and the vehicle all tinted, how you can count how many in there? You can't count once they get away. So you will always have a paucity, an absence, a dearth of data in relation to the numbers for which the members speak about. And indeed, this matter is serious. I'm advised that the fine on conviction for the non-compliance with the law is 6 months in jail or $5,000. This is what I am advised is the fine. So it's substantial, really, and it aims really to assist the police. We have had numerous requests by persons to allow them to have darker tints to cover everything. And on almost every occasion, the police has resisted it. The police has advised against it and asked the government to clamp down on these requests to have people to have darker tints and to make themselves invisible to persons. This has been a challenge, and it is true that we are much more improved in terms of the level of criminal activity, say in 2011, 2014 until now. But none of that improvement undermines the need for us to be able to bring the legislation now and to prevent us from getting back there. And the answer to the question, what happens if you go beyond 10 inches, 11, 12? To me, the answer is self-evident. If you start from the premise that it is a law, every citizen and resident would be well advised not to break the law. You can't be wrong and strong. So if it is 11, you have to remove it to comply with the law, which says 10. If it is 12, you have to make the adjustment to conform with the law, because the law is the law until it is changed. So to me, those issues are very easy to answer, because I start from the premise you can't be wrong and strong. And if you know what the law is, and there is a presumption which the mover of the bill understands better, that ignorance of the law is no excuse. If you hear 10, don't do 11. because that will get you at variance with the law. So, Mr. Speaker, then, as I said, I won't tarry long. It is an important bill. It is a necessary bill, and I believe it is quite timely. Some of the other matters that we hear in terms of addressing the bill are matters that we could deal with in time. And in time, certainly, we will get better at statistical data. But the absence of it does not deny the reality, the lived reality of the people over the years, nor the need. And as the Attorney General has said, this request has come from the law enforcement agencies, and we need to give them their support. I have always said in relation to matters of law and order, everything is on the table, and we shall not take any off. So the adjustment to the bill is welcome, and I want to thank the legal staff, the drafting team, for being able to assist us to get where we are at this particular moment in time. May it please, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Member for St. Christopher 7 and Prime Minister. I recognize the mover of the bill, Honourable Mark Brantley, to do his wrap.
Mr. Speaker, thank you once again, and my gratitude to all of those who have supported this short but important piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, I believe that the Honourable Member for number 7 and our Prime Minister has answered quite eloquently the questions that were put by the Honourable Senator opposite. I marvelled, however, that the Senator, in preparation for a 3-paragraph bill, stood on the roadside for an hour each day, looking at tint to prepare herself. It's certainly a marvellous preparation, and I confess that I have not done as well as the Senator. But to stand up on the road for an hour each day to prepare herself for this debate is actually quite impressive. Mr. Speaker, I believe the Honourable Prime Minister, as I said, has answered quite effectively some of the issues that have been raised. One, however, that troubles me is the call for data as to how many criminals got away. That's an interesting call for data, because I'm not so sure how the police will know that the people in a particular car are criminals who got away because of tint. It's almost as if you're asking an impossibility. And when I started this debate, I did say that this was a simple matter, but perhaps I misspoke, and that it is only simple to me, but actually quite complicated to others. You see, sometimes the debate is necessary, and the suggestion, for example, that we should be here to do other things sounds good. But I believe, as the Honourable Prime Minister has pointed out, what other things? And what really could be more important than coming here to protect and preserve life, to ensure that our drivers are safe on the road, that our pedestrians are safer traversing the roads, and that our law enforcement officers are safer and can more effectively carry out their duty. To me, that is all about the safer and more secure future that this government has promised. And that is what we are seeking to deliver, each and every day. And so this legislation, simple in its terms, but profound in its impact, it's really designed to deliver on that safety and security that we have promised. And to my mind, a government could have no greater duty than to keep our people safe and secure. And so that is what we're seeking to do. And while I hear, for example, the question of if you have a particular tint, will you be stopped? The short answer is yes. The law changes and everybody must comply with the law. If today the fine for something is $200, and you did it tomorrow, when it's $300, you have to pay the bigger fine. The law has changed. You must bring yourself into compliance. And as the Prime Minister, who I didn't know as a lawyer until today, reminded us that ignorance of the law can be no excuse. So we understand that that is what we're seeking to do. And I would urge our drivers out there to be sensible, to drive on our roads in a safe way. We understand, Mr. Speaker, that the number of vehicles on our roads keeps growing exponentially, that young people now, their desires to own their own transportation, to be able to get around. We understand that. And so these are all tools designed to ensure that they are safer, pedestrians are safer, and law enforcement is able to do its job more effectively. I end, Mr. Speaker, by reminding the House and reminding the public and reminding my dear friends opposite that this government is a consultative government. We have always been and have always conducted ourselves in that way. And when we come here with legislation such as this, it is at the imprimatur of our law enforcement. And if the police says to us that they require something to better assist them in doing their jobs, I think we have a duty to respond and to respond positively. So this is not some whim that we have come here on. This is as a result of law enforcement saying to us that as they go about their daily business, these are the types of provisions that will assist them in doing their job. And I believe on that, all of us should be agreed. With those additional words, Mr. Speaker, I would certainly ask that the bill be passed. The bill be read a second time, and that the House can move into committee stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Mover of the bill. The question is, which I inadvertently had put it a bit earlier, but the question is that the bill entitled the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021, which had its first reading on 30th September 2021, be read a second time. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Cap 15.06, otherwise known as the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021.
The bill has been read a second time. The House will go into committee.
Clauses 1 through 3.
The question is that clauses 1, 2, and 3 become part of the bill. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
The enacting clause.
The question is that the enacting clause stands part of the bill. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
The title.
The question is that the title stands part of the bill. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. House resumes.
Mr. Speaker, I am happy to report that the bill has passed through the committee stage without amendments. And I accordingly move that the bill shortly entitled the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021 be read a third time and passed.
The second motion.
The question is that the bill entitled the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021 be read a third time. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to amend the Vehicles and Road Traffic Act, Cap 15.06, otherwise known as the Vehicles and Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021.
The bill has been read a third time and passed. This bill will be forwarded to His Excellency, the Governor General, for his assent, following which it will be gazetted and become the law of the land. Next item, please. I recognize the Honorable Minister Wendy Phipps, who would present on the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021, second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good day to all. I extend a special welcome to the representatives of SCANIPO and to extend best wishes to you for the recent milestone anniversary that you celebrated, and wish you every continued success as you progress and you grow as young parliamentarians who can one day aspire to lead this country and this parliament. Mr. Speaker, I rise with your leave to move the motion for the second reading of the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021, which would have had its first reading on Thursday, August 5th, 2021 in this Honorable House. In rising, I would also wish to open the debate on the said bill, which I consider timely. But before I get into it, I am careful to note that this government has ensured that, given the nature of the bill, we would have offered the general public and all stakeholders concerned a period of 90 days in which to review the bill, because as part of our democratic process, once a bill has had its second reading, it is in the public domain, and interested persons are free to register and document their concerns on the said bill. On that note, I should indicate that up until this very morning, we would not have received any negative feedback on the draft recommendations put forward in the bill. We would have also engaged in a consultation with stakeholders to go an extra step as recent as last Friday, November 5th, in a session for at least 2.5 hours with the support of legal counsel from the Attorney General's chambers to go through the provisions of the bill and to ensure that we provide an opportunity for questions to be asked and answered and clarifications given. I wish to indicate, Mr. Speaker, that the bill that is before us is actually meant to do two things. One, it is intended to replace an existing piece of legislation that would have been passed in 1999 as the National Bureau of Standards Act, Chapter 23.15, Act Number 7 of 1999. And the second purpose is to update our national legislation in terms of providing for the development and policing of a national standards and quality infrastructure in St. Kitts and Nevis, so that our people, the consumers of this federation, importers, wholesalers, retailers alike, can have the best quality when it comes to goods and services, practices and processes for which they will have to pay in order to enjoy the luxuries of same. When the existing legislation would have been passed in 1999, which is like some 22 years ago, because if my memory is correct, I would have been, in a previous life, fortunate to have been part of the consultative process when that bill would have been presented to the former government based on the support offered by CROSPU, the Caribbean Regional Organizations for Standards and Quality, based in Barbados, and it was deemed necessary to take St. Kitts and Nevis beyond the archaic system of having a bureau, even though it was not called that, which mainly looked after interests such as perhaps the examinations of weights and measures, Many of us recall having small shops around the islands where you have your scales, and once a year, twice a year, representatives from trade would come around and ensure that when you sell somebody something that has in a pound of rice, they're checking that scale to make sure that you're not dipping the scale when you're at maybe 3/4 of a pound, and so forth. So in 1999, when this legislation was passed, it saw fit to create the Bureau of Standards then, and put in motion a system whereby you could at least have basic standards when it came to the sale of goods and services, etc., and also basic food quality standards at that time. That legislation, which was comprised of some 6 parts, 47 sections, and 22 definitions under the interpretation heading, would have provided, insofar as the Bureau is concerned, for staffing, financing, operational matters, the preparation, promotion, and control of standards, both mandatory and voluntary. When the existing legislation of 1999 would have been passed, we were still operating under the 1974 CARICOM Treaty of Chagua-Ramos, even though negotiations would have already commenced even back then for the RNM in terms of looking towards a future that is more secure for the people of the CARICOM member states, that would enable better services, better quality goods, etc., to be part, and better trading arrangements to be part of the revised bill. This new bill, therefore, as was the case with the original one, is meant to be what is considered an omnibus piece of legislation, meaning that it is intended to be applied across the member states of CARICOM in a manner that facilitates the goals and the ambitions, particularly of the CARICOM single market and economy. And by that token, to focus on the goals and ambitions of aiding the process of the free movement of goods, services, capital, and labor across the member states. And of course, the revised treaty would have eventually been signed in the Bahamas in July of 2001. The bill before us, Mr. Speaker, therefore goes a lot further in terms of where the existing legislation would have finished off, while preserving those elements in that same legislation that are still relevant. Because even though we are seeking to repeal that act of 1999, there are still germane portions of it that it would be wise to carry forward. The bill calls for the application of quality-based international standards for goods and services coming into the country, and it also covers the applications of practices and processes across multiple sectors and disciplines. In other words, you could have a standard being developed for manufacturing, for a medical procedure, for a way a good might be processed after coming out of the field before it comes into the hand of a greengrocer or somebody with a sidewalk vending outfit, or even before it gets into the supermarket. You can have a standard for virtually anything. And basically, given that St. Kitts and Nevis is a long-standing member of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, it should not be surprising that one of the reasons that we would want to have the legislation updated is to ensure that the national quality and standards infrastructure is in place in the country, so that in the event there are issues of trade disputes, especially those that go across borders, that we will be in a position to make our case clearly. As a side note, we are also very grateful that the WTO has moved out of a period of abeyance and inactivity and questionable relevance now that it has secured a new director, and Director General rather, and at the same time, it then means that the dispute settlement mechanism provided by the WTO has now been put back on an even footing, given the fact that the former Trump White House would have stymied the process in terms of the withholding of approvals for certain key members of that dispute settlement body. But however, the new administration in Washington has made it possible for us all internationally to move on and redeposit our confidence in the dispute settlement mechanism provided by the WTO. While we are a small member state, I should note, Mr. Speaker, we do not get excuses for being small. And even though the burdens of being a member of the international community are great, there are burdens that we have to pay the cost of if we intend to be a responsible player in the international trading community. A close look at the Bureau of Standards bill before us would also show us, Mr. Speaker, that there are noticeable differences from the existing act that is still in force. Before I point out these features, however, I think it will be useful for us to have a basic understanding of what we mean when we talk about standards. And it's in its most basic form, a standard could be defined as an agreed manner in which something has to be done, such as a manufacturing process, how service, especially customer service, should be executed, how customers should be treated, how a medical procedure should be conducted in a surgical theater, what happens first, etc., what instruments to use, and so forth, how a test or an examination should be conducted. For example, in our context, the CSEC examinations, how is that set up? What measures do we put in place to make sure that there's no cheating, that it's a fair examination, etc.? Yet, in spite of the voluntary nature of standards in general, there are huge benefits that can be accrued if we take the deliberate step to make sure that we put them in place, including but not limited to preservation of human health and life, environmental protection and management, the approval of processes that impact on food safety, the execution of managerial and organizational efficiencies, manufacturing of appliances and spare parts to ensure conformity, and the list goes on. And to just give us a basic example, to ensure that when somebody says they're manufacturing AA batteries, which we refer to locally as Penlight batteries, that regardless of the supermarket, the grocery store, the hardware store that you go into, there are certain basic features that a Penlight battery should have, which you expect it to have, if it is to do what it is supposed to do in the appliance that it should power. So that's a very basic understanding of what we mean by conformity to standards. Mr. Speaker, the bill before us, therefore, is comprised of some 9 parts, 53 sections, and 32 definitions under the interpretation heading. And as such, the bill covers the following sections: functions of the Bureau, administration of the Bureau, licenses for use of the standards mark, business of the Bureau, quality certification, offenses and penalties, appeals, and miscellaneous provisions. Upon close examination, what we would recognize if we were able to compare and contrast the existing legislation with the draft bill that is in front of us is that the areas where we are noting new and or expanded features in the bill are as follows. On the licenses, which will be granted by the Bureau in order to use the St. Kitts and Nevis standard mark. In other words, the Bureau will have the authority to determine if a particular importer, retailer, etc., or manufacturer has the right to sell or trade in a good by license once an established criteria has been set up. The other new or improved feature is the quality certification by the Bureau to certify standards and quality and also conformity to the agreed standards. For example, the Bureau will be in a position to certify even before goods leave the warehouse that these goods meet certain certification standards. And some of these goods in particular that would warrant that type of certification would include white goods, goods that would, like washing machines, refrigerators, other electrical appliances that you need to plug into an electrical outlet to make sure with all safety and all confidence that when you pay your good money to buy these items and you take them home and you plug them in, you're not going to have an explosion that takes off your roof or that you would not be electrocuted. So that is what we're talking about here. Offenses and penalties. Now, this is a section that has been greatly improved, and I will come to that later in my discourse. But it is put in place in order to prevent fraud, counterfeiting, knockoffs, and basically to protect consumers and importers and the public in general in terms of product tampering, false advertising, false labeling, and so forth, so that we will know ahead of time that every secure measure, every security feature is being put in place to ensure that when consumers, when the public, when importers, wholesalers buy goods from overseas, we can basically close our eyes and assume that it is a good quality product, even if you have to pay more for it. And of course, that will prevent us from falling victim to some of the woes and transgressions of business. For example, you walk into a store up at 4th Street and you see a handbag marked Fendi, and they tell you can get it for $50. And anybody in their right mind knows that there's no way in God's green earth that you're going to get a Fendi bag for $50 unless it was manufactured in some questionable outfit, maybe in a third world country, or it fell off the back of a truck. And somehow you're foolish enough to buy it when any sensible person recognizes that a Fendi bag could cost you $2,000, $3,000 US. Ladies in here, I'm sure some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's an appeals process that has been placed into the new draft bill, which was not present in the existing legislation. And this has been deliberately put in place to ensure that individuals, organizations, manufacturers, retailers, wholesalers, importers, etc., will have an impartial and graduated avenue through which they could have a hearing and a determination of matters for which there might be disagreement in terms of decisions that are taken by the Bureau. So that if there comes to a point where there is a dispute, a trade dispute of any type, at least we could have a graduated process where it can go to several steps before having to jump to the final recourse, which is the High Court, to address a grievance. So that process has been put in place. Mr. Speaker, in terms of these new and improved sections in the new bill, it would be remiss of me if I did not make the effort to point out that in terms of the list of offenses and penalties, there has been a significant expansion, and that the penalties are far more severe, basically sending the message to the public, to wholesalers, importers, retailers, that anything that you sell to the public, we are going to hold your feet to the fire. And that you will not be allowed to take advantage of persons who spend their hard-earned money on goods and services and figure that you can get away with it, and they have no choice but to take what you dish out to them. So, for example, these penalties and offenses are outlined in Part 6 of the bill, in particular, sections 33 to 43, and pertain to non-conformity to and in compliance with any established technical regulation in terms of goods and services, processes, and practices as it relates to the sale of the said goods, services, processes, practices, unlawful use of labels. So, for example, you cannot decide to bottle your own water here in St. Kitts and Nevis and use your computer, use your printer to put on a label that says Evian, when we know that Evian might be the global Rolls-Royce brand when it comes to spring water out of France, but you're trying to knock it off here in St. Kitts and Nevis. False representation in terms of statements and claims regarding the use of the standard mark. For example, if your product, when submitted to the Bureau of Standards, does not cut the mustard, and you try to fake it, to counterfeit the standard mark, and it is discovered, then there is a penalty for that. Unlawful obliteration or a stamp or a standard. For example, there might be something missing from your good, maybe an expiry date, which is a key feature in terms of standards when it comes to food labeling, and the date might have passed, but you're smarter than everybody else as a retailer, so you take a black marker, a Sharpie pen, and you scratch out the point where the listed expiry date and manufacturing date appears, because you want to get it off your shelf, and that too is illegal. The attempt to defraud, for example, I gave some instances of knockoffs, counterfeiting of merchandise, etc. Same would go for people buying designer shoes, and you figure there's some store that is open up down at Port Zante that you can get a pair of signature red bottom stiletto Louis Vuitton shoes, and you could get them for 100 EC, and that would be foolish. Because internationally, the best price you might get for a pair of that type of shoe might be $3,000 US, and so forth. Unlawful use of the standards mark. For example, if you walk into the Bureau of Standards, where Mr. Laplace, and thank you for joining us here, we do have our director of the Bureau of Standards here, Mr. Stuart Laplace, and it is largely through his efforts we have gotten this far in terms of the advancements and the widening and scope of services at the Bureau. If you break into the Bureau and you decide, well, somebody has told you where you could find a standard mark, and you're going to use them to put on your products, they will be held to pay for that too. Impersonation of the inspectors of the Bureau. The legislation calls for inspectors, as is the existing legislation, and you will not be allowed to counterfeit that by claiming to be a representative from the Bureau so that you can simply gain access to a place of business, a warehouse, a manufacturing process, etc., because perhaps maybe you are competing interests and you would like to know what their trade secrets are, so you're going to try to impersonate an inspector. That will not be allowed. Tampering with articles that may have been seized by the Bureau's inspectors. The legislation allows for seizure of some of these articles if, upon inspection, they might be needed as evidence in a court of law. Mr. Speaker, for all of these 9 offenses that I would have just outlined, convicted persons would be liable to a fine of $10,000. In the case of a continuing offense, there is an additional penalty of $1,000 per day for every day that the offense is continued, or imprisonment of 2 years. I should point out that the existing legislation contains much lower fines. For example, fines cannot exceed $5,000, and there can be a term of imprisonment of not more than 2 years or both. In the case of continuing offenses, there's a penalty of just $100 per day following the existing legislation. And as I noted earlier, the new bill is seeking to take that up several times more by putting that continuing offense penalty at $1,000 per day. I should indicate, Mr. Speaker, that in addition to these stiffer penalties and fines, the bill before us also provides for the imposition of an additional penalty, in particular, the assessment of the monetary value that you would have gained or would have been likely to gain by the committing of fraud when it comes to the sale of goods and services that may not meet the mustard when it comes to standards and quality. What this means, moreover, is that a term of imprisonment of 12 months can be imposed if the offender refuses to pay for that. So it can be assessed based on how much money you made unlawfully, and for the time that you continue and refuse to pay the penalty, there could be a separate imprisonment of 12 months. And I would also state that the offenders are also liable to suffer forfeiture of any articles pertinent to the offense that is committed by order of the High Court. One might ask, why is the government going to all of this trouble to impose far stiffer penalties in this new Bureau of Standards Act? And the answer is simple. The simple answer is that this government has made it clear that the top priority for us is our people, and by extension, our people deserve to have nothing less than the best when it comes to the sale, purchase, and consumption of goods and services. We also deserve the best when it comes to standards that relate to processes and practices. In other words, as a member state of the WTO, and as a proactive member of the international trading system, our people should not be forced to accept substandard goods that are shipped from the US, from Europe, or from wherever. And it should not be taken for granted that we are obligated to pay for them and to take them. It should never be taken for granted to anybody in the international community that because St. Kitts and Nevis is a small jurisdiction, that anything you wish to dump on the region and by extension on St. Kitts and Nevis, we have no choice but to take it. Because those of you who travel to the US and to Europe would recognize that there might be different standards at play when it comes to the sale of goods and services. Sometimes what they're trading in for consumption in the US and consumption in Europe might be at a higher standard to those that are being produced for regional markets, simply because the standards that should be in place in those receiving or importing countries are not what they should be. And it is taken for granted that, look, these are small countries, little banana republics, send them these. And as such, some of the times they even send goods with a very short shelf life. So if you can't move them off the shelf as a business person, you're stuck with them to try to call a sale, or you have to dump them at Connery. And we're saying that we should not have to put up with that. The legislation being proposed also means that the same standards that we would expect in first world countries, North America, Europe, etc., we should expect to be applied right here in St. Kitts and Nevis, because the people of St. Kitts and Nevis are not second-class citizens when it comes to their purchasing power, their consumer knowledge, etc., and what they spend their money on, and have the right to demand quality. It also sends a strong message that the government of St. Kitts and Nevis, through the creation and maintenance of these standards, would not allow other countries to continue in any existing practices that might exist, such as substandard, soon-to-be expired goods, faulty goods, or poor quality goods, that they don't expect us to take them. As it is right now, between the existing legislation and the existing Consumer Affairs Act, which would have been passed in 2009, one would recognize that, for example, if a young single mother goes into Best for Less and tries to buy a bicycle, takes it home, her little 5-year-old gets on it and the wheel falls off, you take it back to Best for Less, they trade it, exchange it for another bicycle, and you take it back home again and the wheel falls off again. You take it back to Best for Less and they change it again. And at this point, the proprietor would be of the view that something might be wrong with the shipment. But guess what? He has no recourse overseas in terms of where he can go to get redress for that grievance. The most he can do at that point would be to simply give you a refund. Or if there's something else in the store that you thought that you needed, maybe you can get the value of those goods against the value of the item that you're not satisfied with and the store cannot reasonably give you a replacement for. So that too is another issue that we would like to address. And by extension, it is for that reason why this Parliament would have already had the first reading of the replacement bill for the consumer affairs legislation that is in place at the moment. So that when we would have finished all of these new bits of legislation, we would have been at a point of being safely on our way of providing for a national quality infrastructure and culture change when it comes to the provision of goods and services and the demand for such by and on behalf of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. It also means that by having the new bill, we will now have the wherewithal in place to seek all the way up, if necessary, to the level of the WTO, which is our dispute settlement body, the address or redress of grievances when it comes to international trading disputes that we may have with international business partners, based on the fact that we would have already signed on to all of these international trading standards. Mr. Speaker, I should also note that one of the major advantages of the bill being debated today is the ability to develop technical regulations, which the present legislation does not give us. The existing legislation provides for general regulations that can be put in place in order to set basic standards as per Section 46 of that Act. We are keenly aware, and at times painfully aware, that the world that we are in now is not the same type of environment we were in 22 years ago. Counterfeiters have become craftier. Technology has aided them in having knockoffs and counterfeiting done and fraud committed, where it would almost take a man on a horseback with a magnifying glass to be able to see that something in front of you is not the real deal. And it is for that reason why we need the benefit of being able to have technical regulations that can be applied across different sectors, different spheres, etc., including but not limited to matters such as consumer protection, environmental protection, acceptable quality for goods produced for home use or for export, prevention of fraud, misleading advertising, misleading labeling, and also the preservation of health, welfare, and safety of the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. Of course, all of these regulations, which can be, according to the bill, which can be declared by the Minister on the advice of the Bureau, will be added over time to give effect to the provisions that we are passing here today, because it is not practical to expect that every single provision that we can come up with, every single standard, every single regulation will be covered by the 27 pages of the bill that we're looking at the moment. I should point out that the staff of the Bureau, led ably by Mr. Laplace, has already been proactive in advance of the passage of this particular replacement bill by having draft regulations with the aid of the Attorney General's chambers already put in place, ready for consultation to give effect to the new bill. And some of the early regulations that are already prepared include the general requirements for the labeling of goods entering the country, food labeling regulations, packaged or bottled water regulations, and we know that we have several water bottlers in this country, and conformity as it relates to tires. Why did we include this one on tires? And I have to say when I say this, that we are presiding over a set of coincidences here today, because we've just finished dealing with an amendment to the Road Traffic Amendment Bill. And at the same time, one of the reasons why we have chosen to come up with a draft regulation on conformity with tires is that based on the research done by the Bureau, we are convinced that a number of the road accidents that are being caused in this country could very well have to do with the standard of the tires that are on vehicles. What do I mean by that? We import tires from Japan, we import tires from Europe, we import them from China, we import them from the United States. And from those countries where we import tires that have temperate climates, meaning they have winter seasons, there are snow tires being sold. And at the end of the winter, they want to get rid of their snow tires. So guess what? Where do you think they're sending them? They're sending them to other jurisdictions that are unsuspecting. We buy these tires. They're not suitable for use in the Caribbean, where environmental and weather conditions are much different and road conditions are different, and you take it for granted that you're getting a good deal on a set of tires for your car, not recognizing that you could be digging your own grave by the investment in that type of tire. So one of the regulations that will be put in place very early with this legislation is the conformity when it comes to the importation of tires. So that is something to look out for. I should point out that on the issue of food labeling regulations, the Bureau is also working closely with the Pan American Health Organization to bring to the forefront of packaging labeling that has been long talked about in regional circles, international circles, including the WHO, including CARPHA, in terms of ensuring that goods entering St. Kitts and Nevis or produced here that are considered food and beverage, once they are goods that have high levels of fats, salts, and sugars, that a regulation can be put in place to put that data on the front of the packaging. It doesn't mean that persons will not consume it, but at least those ingredients will be conspicuously placed on the product so that you see what decisions you're making about purchases and about the decisions in terms of what you're putting into your body. And why is that important? It is important because St. Kitts and Nevis has a very serious problem when it comes to non-communicable diseases, and every one of these types of foods, fatty foods, salty foods, sugary foods, would have a negative impact on someone's health. As it is right now, St. Kitts and Nevis has NCDs as the leading cause of death and disability. Some 83% of our deaths are due to non-communicable diseases. And by the placement of the packaging information right on the front of the label, it is hoped by global and regional and local agencies with interest in health that persons will become more educated on their food choices and make healthier decisions when it comes to diet and, by extension, lifestyle. So that is one other issue that we will be looking at in terms of food labeling. Other regulations which will be coming on stream would include the establishment of standard committees and technical regulation coordination unit within the Bureau, as well as the development of a code of practice to adapt good regulatory practices in certain enterprises, establishments, etc. There would also be identified as St. Kitts and Nevis technical barriers to trade focal point to facilitate a point of interface for the WTO. So at the local level, that person will be vested within the Bureau. If there is a trading issue for which there is a dispute, that can be addressed to the WTO via the Bureau of Standards. There are a number of other future regulations that would help to give effect to the legislation that would also call for the strengthening of partnerships between ministries other than the Ministry of Trade under which the Bureau falls, such as tourism, agriculture, transport, to ensure that we do have the types of standards that are required to be in place to protect our people. Similar strengthening of partnerships are required with local importers, manufacturers, and with customs, because customs has to become a major player in terms of the partnership role with the goods and services and the standards we expect to ensure that these goods will have before they even are allowed to leave the gate of the port and be placed on a shelf somewhere. I would have noted in the front of this presentation that the Bureau of Standards Bill is omnibus in nature, and I would have explained what I meant by that. I would also go further to indicate that when omnibus pieces of legislation are placed before our government, it is an opportunity for us to look and to determine if that omnibus piece of legislation in its existing condition warrants being brought to Parliament as is, or should we do the extra step of doing the research, doing the local assessment or situation analysis to determine if there are portions of that bill that make sense or don't make sense in terms of entering the legislation, because we have to suit the legislation to our own situation here on the ground. And as such, the Ministry of International Trade and the management of the Bureau would have carefully examined the draft bill before bringing it to Parliament for that same reason. We would have sought the advice of the Attorney General's chambers. We would have undertaken our own research, secondary and primary, on the bill's implementation in other member states which have already passed it in their parliaments. We would have also looked for, asked and received advice from CARICOM in terms of COSCU, based in Barbados. We would have also sought and gained valuable information and advice from the German consulting firm that is currently assisting the Bureau of Standards with the development of our own national quality policy, the NPQ, that is mentioned in the interpretation section of the bill. For ease of reference, I should indicate that the NPQ, which is National Quality Policy, is meant to establish a national quality infrastructure in order to address conformity, metrology, standards, and accreditation functions of the Bureau. The consultancy on our NPQ is being executed by Mesopartner, Part G of Germany, which also has a regional office in Jamaica. And I am proud to announce that St. Kitts and Nevis also has a daughter of the soil who is working with that German consultancy, Mesopartners, in the person of Ms. Tamu Brown of St. Kitts. And she has been rather supportive in terms of the work that has gone into the drafting of that national quality policy. Mr. Speaker, based on the review and the research that we would have done, and the examination of best practices, and the expert advice we would have received from various agencies, the Ministry of International Trade and the Bureau of Standards would have taken the decision to remove from the omnibus bill that we would have received from CARICOM the provisions for a standards council at this time. And I repeat, we have taken the decision based on advice to remove from the CARICOM bill the provisions for a standards council at this time. The repetition was deliberate. There are several reasons for this. First, I must indicate for those of you who are familiar with the Parent Act, the existing one from 1999, that too made provisions for a standards council. And after 22 years, the Standards Council still has not been put in place, and there was a good reason for not putting it in place. Because what that calls for is basically the setup of a bureaucratic establishment within the Ministry of Trade, whereby you will be creating almost like another SCELEC, a quasi-governmental or statutory body, which will now take over the running of the Bureau. Regrettably, it is not the type of arrangement where you can put, like when you put somebody on a statutory board and you figure, oh, you put them there because they have something valuable to offer, or heaven forbid that they're a party supporter. When it comes to the Standards Council, the persons who sit on the council have to be vested with the knowledge, the skills, the expertise and the qualification to function in that capacity, especially when it comes to commercial standards, international trading standards, etc. Regrettably for us in St. Kitts and Nevis, we are not yet at that point to be able to say with confidence that we can go out and populate a Standards Council from among the skill sets that we have here in St. Kitts and Nevis. It is a step we are hopeful that we can get past, so that one of these days we can come back and say that we now have the know-how, the wherewithal, the human capital by which we can then put in this Standards Council to function. But I am careful to add that in terms of the operations of that Standards Council, that council, if it was allowed to function, will be responsible for all of the staffing, all of the recruitment, the entire work program of the budgeting and financing. It would have cause to create financial statements, lay those statements in Parliament, etc., and also to handle the management of inspectors, etc. Now, basically, in terms of where we are right now, as I said earlier, these councillors would have to be chosen carefully. And in the research, as I indicated earlier, that was done, we would have looked at the member states where this bill had been passed. And every single one of them went ahead and passed the Standards Council as an insertion into the omnibus bill. But then guess what? Only 2 of those jurisdictions up to now have been able to implement or operationalize the Standards Council for the very reasons that I gave earlier, in terms of the difficulty in finding qualified people in country to be on that council. The only 2 CARICOM jurisdictions based on our research where that Standards Council has been effectively put in place have been Jamaica and Trinidad and Tobago. All of the others, even though they have passed it, that part of the legislation is still inoperable. Now, what do we do in lieu of the situation when it comes to not having a Standards Council? And the answer for us is simple. By virtue of the fact that the Ministry of International Trade and the Bureau of Standards had been proactive in terms of seeking out a consultancy, which, by the way, has been funded by the Caribbean Development Bank with the support of CROSCU, by going the extra step in having that national quality policy put in place, it has been drafted in such a way that it is going to make room for the assignment of staff appropriately, the decisions in terms of having the appropriate skill sets, specialized skill sets within the Bureau to make sure that the work gets done, to look at matters of the improvements in our laboratory, because the multipurpose laboratory is part of the Bureau, and also international accreditation at the same time. It would also allow us to effectively or more effectively handle matters of standardization, metrology, accreditation, conformity assessment, testing, certification, inspection, and market surveillance. The quality infrastructure provided by the policy will also enhance our national competitiveness and allow for greater economic diversification and present new opportunities for export market development, product development, and attraction of investment into the country. And by extension, that translates into improved foreign exchange earnings and the integration of our territory into the global value chain trading system. All of these benefits will be able to boost the confidence of our international trading partners and visitors alike who will access the goods and services that we have here. Mr. Speaker, as can be expected, the operationalization of this new act will have to be monitored and evaluated consistently by the indication of performance indicators within it, and basically have revisions as necessary in order to remain compliant with the provisions of the WTO, especially as it relates to technical barriers to trade and the agreement, that related agreement of the WTO. The ministry realizes that it will call for extra consultations, continuous consultation and partnership with importers, customs, excise, public education, consumer sensitization, among other matters. I would like to state, however, before I close off my explanation on the features of the bill, that one of the key features that has been preserved in the existing bill is that matter that has to do with secrecy when it comes to Clause 47. It was carefully put in the original act and it is repeated here. And why is that necessary? Officers of the Bureau of Standards, in the course of their work, will from time to time have to do product testing. Those samples, when tested by the Bureau or with the support of other partner labs overseas, where our capacity cannot meet the demand for testing, would expose those officers of the Bureau to recipes, trade secrets, etc. So for example, let's say that there is cause based on consumer complaints to go into KFC and to do a testing of a sample batch of the product, which we know is very popular in St. Kitts, very popular as a global fast food brand. It then means that the staff of the Bureau will be able to determine the recipe that is used in the preparation of KFC. Same thing would happen if you had to go into a bottling plant where there was a license to bottle Coca-Cola, which too has an international trade secret locked under lock and key. It means that the staff of the Bureau will have to then go the extra step in securing and providing comfort to the retailer, the producer of that item, that has a trade secret, which is part of its competitive advantage, to ensure that it is not shared with third parties. And by extension, there will be eventually a regulation dealing with that matter of secrecy and the need to have an oath of confidentiality signed by staff of the Bureau to ensure the safety of the trade secrets, trademarks, recipes, etc., that will be attached to the products that they are testing. So that is an important matter to look at. In general, Mr. Speaker, before I take my seat and allow for further inputs on the bill, I would like to use this opportunity to commend the ministry, the management of the Ministry of International Trade, the permanent secretary, Mrs. Jasmine Weeks, and Mr. Laplace in particular. Mr. Laplace has now grown the staff size, specialist size, up to 33 or so staff members to meet the demands of an evolving and modern Bureau of Standards. There's a transformation project that is currently on the way, paid for by the 11th European Development Fund, and when done, we would have the ability, under one roof, as the only jurisdiction in the OECS, to have metrology and microbiology taking place under one premises. And that is a remarkable achievement for which I now commend them. By extension, the Ministry of Agriculture, whose laboratory also adjoins the Bureau of Standards, has quite a bit of its technical improvements being done by similar consultants. And it is the long-term goal, as in the design of that whole complex, which would have an interconnected corridor, to allow St. Kitts and Nevis to have a rather modern laboratory complex for the Federation, with services being provided not just by the Bureau of Standards, but also by the Agriculture Laboratory, that is its immediate neighbor on the same compound. So I wanted to note that. We have also been along the path quite far in terms of HACCP certification. And HACCP, as we know, refers to Hazard Analysis Critical Control Points, where you look at various stages of a process to determine and to ensure that the process is clean, especially when it comes to food production. And if there is contamination, you can go exactly to the point where the contamination took place and deal with it before it becomes a public hazard. And in the new year, by extension, because of the improvements at the Bureau, we are cleaning up our own backyard first by ensuring that we will have in place a situation whereby the abattoir and the fisheries division will be the two first agencies in government in early 2022 to become HACCP certified. and then we can move on to other private sector entities. I should indicate that in our partnership with manufacturing, some of the standards that they have in place surpass what we may have in place already. For example, firms like Cajola Cristado are already ISO 9001 certified, but are still required by law to work with the Bureau every time they are coming up for reaccreditation. And at the same time, we have a project being funded with the support of Caribbean, of CrossQ, etc., and I think Caribbean Export, to assist firms such as Cariburi in terms of HACCP certification, which they already had and have in place, I think, but also ISO certification. So, Mr. Speaker, there's a lot happening nationally in terms of where we would like to take our country when it comes to standards and quality, and the type of quality infrastructure we wish to have in place to create a new culture in St. Kitts and Nevis, where what we present to the public in terms of goods and services, processes and practices would be top-notch. Because as I indicated, St. Kitts and Nevis is a responsible member of the international community, and our people deserve no less than those citizens in first world countries. But it's going to take work. It is going to take legislative and regulatory infrastructure to be put in place to create those safeguards, and at the same time allow us the recourse to have redress of grievances on trade-related matters by accessing the WTO, of which we are a signatory. So essentially, I would like to close there and to indicate that there are several minor amendments that the omnibus bill would have, we would have noted, and these, if I'm not mistaken, would have been circulated by the clerk of the House before the start of my remarks. They constitute 2 pages and can eventually be dealt with when we come to the committee stage of the bill. With those words, Mr. Speaker, I wish the bill safe passage and look forward to its eventual implementation. May it please you, sir.
Has so eloquently and thoroughly covered all aspects of this piece of legislation that I'm confident that she has convinced everyone in this House to vote for the bill. And so perhaps we should ask for the vote now and move on. But I am aware that sometimes bills that are so comprehensive and sometimes very straightforward do create opportunities for persons to make waves in this House. The bill, Mr. Speaker, complies with the charter set out by the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas. The revised Treaty of Chaguaramas sets out standards and technical regulations in Part 3. And Part 3 of that charter addresses common supportive measures. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, Article 67 of the treaty speaks to the Council quoted in collaboration with competent agencies should be developing standardization programs consistent with the international obligations of member states. It is a program, the objectives of which include trade facilitation, enhanced efficiency in production and delivery of goods and services, and the protection of consumers and the environment. And Mr. Speaker, perhaps I should go to Article 67, Standards and Technical Regulations. Quoted shall, in collaboration with competent agencies, develop a standardization program in furtherance of the objectives of this charter and consistent with the international obligations of member states. In implementing the program, the member states shall not use standards, technical regulations, and conformity assessment procedures as barriers to trade. The program shall have the following objectives: trade facilitation, enhanced efficiency in the production and delivery of goods and services, improved quality of goods and services traded within the community and with third-party states, consumer protection and environmental protection. And the program shall include the following elements: harmonization of standards and technical regulations, and transparency in the development and promulgation of standards and technical regulations. Recognition of conformity assessment procedures through mutual recognition agreements or other means. Facilitation of standards, infrastructure development at the national and regional levels. Facilitation of metrology infrastructure development, and arrangements for the exchange of information with respect to developments and implementation of standards and technical regulations among the parties to the treaty. You see how many times, Mr. Speaker, they're speaking about standards. 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 It might become a buzzword, but it affects us in everything that we do. Purchase, sell. Standards becomes a buzzword. The community shall promote the establishment of a regional standards body which shall facilitate implementation of the standards program. It must assist member states in understanding and fulfilling their obligations under the treaty and other international agreements. It must facilitate access to technical assistance available to member states. In pursuing that mandate, Mr. Speaker, the community has set up an organization called COSQ. COSQ was established about 2 decades ago, on July 5th, 2001. The aim of COSQ is to promote efficiency and competitive production of goods and services through the process of standardization and the verification of quality across the region. 14 member states are members of COSQ. A secretariat in Barbados is set up, and those 14 members from Antigua all the way down to Guyana, of course I should not leave out Suriname and Haiti, they are all included, are members of this COSQ. And every country, or each of those 14 countries, have a member on what we describe as the COSQ board. The COSQ board meets, Mr. Speaker, at least twice annually. They meet at least twice annually. And, Mr. Speaker, the board meets, and at those meetings, they trash out all of the issues that result in decision-making of the Council. The Council relies on their advice, their expertise, and their recommendations. And of course, make decisions that affect how the region relates to each other in terms of its goods and services being shared among us, and even to third parties. Every other nation state, Mr. Speaker, has already moved to pass the bills in their territories. And I suppose one may say that St. Kitts and Nevis is last out of the blocks. I noticed, Mr. Speaker, that there was a bill called the Standards Bill 2015, And while I hope some people may not see us getting out of the blocks last as being a negative or a setback or a disadvantage, I'm here to assure you, Mr. Speaker, and the people of this nation, that sometimes when you get out of the blocks too fast, you give a false start. And my grandmother used to say, the race ain't always for the swift. It ain't always the swift does win the race. We have, as a result of coming at this time, learned from those who have gone before us and have seen the challenges that they have faced with the implementation of this omnibus bit of legislation. It is why the minister referred to the fact that the legislation has been amended and that some sections have been removed. And that is important. So we have learned from that. And as a result, Mr. Speaker, today's bill that we are debating, while the bill I saw in 2015 had some 65 sections, I think it was, today's bill has 52 sections. And when this bill is passed, Mr. Speaker, it will repeal, of course, the bill my minister referred to. And if you go to section 52 of the bill, repeal and savings and transitional provisions. The National Bureau of Standards Act Cap 23.15 is hereby repealed. And it goes on, number 2, notwithstanding the repeal of the National Bureau of Standards Act under subsection 1 of this section, as from the date on which the Act comes into force. A, all notices, designations, and certificates issued under the former Act in respect of any matter dealt with in that Act are deemed to have been issued under this Act. The Bureau established under the former Act shall continue in being as the Bureau established under this Act. The employees of the Bureau established under the former Act, who were employees immediately before the effective date, remains employees of the Bureau. The assets, all assets and liabilities, rights and obligations of the Bureau remain the assets, liabilities, rights and obligations of the Bureau. And that's CDE, a specification, code of practice, standard or document referred to in the former Act, which is in force immediately before the effective date, shall continue in force and is deemed to be a St. Christopher and Nevis standard, which has been set and issued under this Act. I went to the repeal provision, Mr. Speaker, because I wanted to point out to the public that the fact that we're replacing the previous bill, there are some sections, there are some provisions which are still transitional, savings and transitional, so that the Bureau can continue its work uninhibited by the transition which is taking place and by the implementation of this Act. The book of the bill, Mr. Speaker, has explained that the bill is an omnibus bill. And I think she fully explained that, so I would not go into that any further. I would not labor you with those other details again. However, I must point out that the original bill will be repealed and that it will be replaced by this bill, which I think has already been explained to this House and which I think every member here has already made up their mind they're going to support. Mr. Speaker, in support of the standardization of the standards, the Federation is on the cusp of becoming a leader in metrology. I mean the regional leader. I mean probably second to United States of America. Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to speak a bit about metrology because I want especially youngsters who are still at CFBC to recognize that it's all not about accountants and lawyers and the like and business administration, but the science is important for them to put as part of their courses of study so that they can contribute to the kind of work which is being embarked upon by institutions like the Bureau of Standards. Because metrology is the science, of course, of measurement, embracing both experimental and theoretical determinations at any level of uncertainty in any field of science and technology. And can be divided into 3 subfields: scientific metrology, applied metrology, and legal metrology. And while it is true, Mr. Speaker, that legal metrology is the end of the line, especially concerning regulatory requirements, there is a growing interest in applying nanomaterials to societal needs, and it is now urging the increasing attention be given to the development of scientific and applied metrology to address nanomaterials. This is why this is so important. This metrology unit, which we now have in our nation, which is now equipped with some of the best quality equipment out there. This multidisciplinary field spans many disciplinary fields such as chemistry and physics, material science, biology, engineering, and nanoscience. Nanomaterials, of course, Mr. Speaker, embrace a full range of traditional material classes. This distinction between metrology in general and metrology as a nanoscience stem from the different properties of materials on a nanoscale as compared to the bulk counterparts. You would have heard, Mr. Speaker, people talking about bulk type goods, but this field will take you into the microbiology, into the scientific, the chemicals approach to everything that is being sold or bought in our federation. In other words, Mr. Speaker, this department should be taking you to a point where you can tell what specific chemical is in any food that you're going to be putting in your stomach. They will have the capacity to do that. Test that food and tell you what's in it. That is where we are going, Mr. Speaker. It's important to note that. It was only a few months ago, Mr. Speaker, only a few months ago, that we experienced the adverse effects of ciguataria in our food chain. That ciguataria toxin was not identified by any of our small island states. We had to send to, was it North America? North America, to be able to identify that toxin and to be able to then respond in a way to when we understood what the toxin were. And that, Mr. Speaker, is where we are going in St. Kitts to be able to identify those kind of toxins without the help of the United States of America. Not anymore, Mr. Speaker. We're going to be able to do it here. We have been provided, Mr. Speaker, and I hope I can describe this machine right, chromatographer. It is a world-class piece of equipment that can process over 200 different test applications all at the same time and give you a result in minutes. What this means, Mr. Speaker, is that the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis has become the leader in the region. Only 2 other places in the region, well, I will say in the West, other than North America. Only 2 other places have some capacity to do some testing, but will not be at the level where St. Kitts and Nevis will be as we go further into this aspect using our chromatographer. Those two countries, Mr. Speaker, are Cuba and Chile. And for the acquisition of these kinds of equipment, I really want to give kudos to Stuart Laplace and his team. And I heard the minister mention the permanent secretary, because that team has worked so hard. They understand the importance of the task which they are assigned. In fact, Mr. Speaker, if I can find it here, almost 2 years ago, as a matter of fact, in 2020, at the height of the pandemic, we heard about the upgrades that will include accreditation and update equipment that will facilitate trade. Services at the Metrology Department will expand its weights and measures to enhance the capabilities to collaborate all equipment used in the trade. And they were expressing, and can now boast, that the Chemistry Department will be moving towards ISO accreditation. That is, having the competence to carry out tests and or calibrations, including sampling, using standard methods, non-standard methods, and laboratory development methods. Where trade is concerned, they will update some equipment where the department can test and verify such items as jams, jellies, coconut drops, juices, teas. And why is that important? Because we have a thriving agro-processing industry in St. Kitts and Nevis that may very well want to have, and are doing it, but may very well want to have clearer passage, exporting their produce to other territories in the region and maybe to third parties as well. And this is where the Bureau of Standards come in, because they will have the capacity to do so. They will be able to give the certificate necessary that the goods will have safe passage to where they intend them to go. They will be testing, Mr. Speaker, and giving labels which can at least identify the calorific values, how much calories, sugar, proteins. Those can be added onto the label so that people will know when you buy something and eat in it, what it is in it you eat in. And if you know you have things like diabetes, what to avoid. Well, even if you don't have diabetes, still avoid. Yes, Mr. Speaker, that is the level to where we are going in St. Kitts and Nevis at our Bureau of Standards. They can, you go to the gas station, you don't know if when they give you a gallon of gas, it's a gallon. They will be able to do all that testing and make sure that when you say it's a gallon, it's a gallon. When you say it's a pound, it's a pound. That is the difference that is taking place in St. Kitts and Nevis, driven and being governed under the new legislation that will be passed today. They'll be testing the protein content in all the food stuff. I don't want to go to the China goods, but you always hear about goods coming from China. Well, we'll be able to test them. So for quality, for standard, that's what we'll be able to do. Every consumer in this country gets involved in something that involves the work of the metrology department. Just buying a piece of clothing, buying something in the shop. Everything that you're doing in consuming has, now metrology will have an impact, an even greater impact, because they have the capacity to do the kind of testing hitherto was not available to them. They'll be able to test things like cement, the steel and the blocks, to make sure that
people giving you the correct PSI when they say they're building something and they're giving you a certain level of or strength of concrete that they can test it. And this is the importance of the work that will be done by the Bureau as we move ahead and implement this new legislation. Traditionally, some of these exercises would have taken us to send things abroad for testing, costing us in the region of something like 40,000 and 50,000 a year sometimes, just to get something tested overseas. That will be a thing of the past. That will go just now, Mr. Speaker. What this means, Mr. Speaker, is that this federation is now in a position, will be by 2022, now and in 2021-22, that if the microbiology program even goes down, then they could rely on the chemistry program. They'll be able to apply chemistry where microbiology goes down to be able to provide the results that they need. I spoke about the fish that were contaminated with Sigatoria toxin. And the minister mentioned it earlier. In short order, we will be able to be HACCP certified. And the minister explained what that meant. But it's not unusual to repeat some things, and I may say it a bit differently. Because HACCP certification is an internationally recognized method of identifying and managing food safety and related risks. And when to Central and Active Food Safety Program can provide your customers and anybody who using food and the public, the regulatory agencies, the assurance that the food safety program is well managed. HACCP is a management system in which food safety is addressed through the analysis and control of biological, chemical, and physical hazards from raw material production, procurement and handling to manufacturing, distribution, and consumption of the finished product. 10 key criteria are examined in the process to give full assurance to all facets of food safety. Certified products need to meet all the relevant criteria, not just individual components. Certified products are completely fit for purpose. After we in St. Kitts give our HACCP certified, we will know, no ifs, no buts, no maybe, that the goods that are certified by our Bureau of Standards are of the standard of the quality that can be consumed anywhere without question and should be able to get through the ports without certain restrictions because they're HACCP certified. Mr. Speaker, further, the Bureau of Standards puts us in a position to be able to verify and test every imported product. I mentioned it earlier, but I'm repeating it again. So that when you see we certify a product as, say, wild-caught salmon, if we can test it and say it is wild-caught salmon, it is wild-caught salmon. And the fact that we can test it means that you will not be able to cheat in our market. And that is one of the roles, strengthening the role of the Bureau to be able to do that, so that you don't go in a supermarket and see something marked wild-caught salmon, which is not. And that is the kind of work, the scaling up of the work of the Department of the Bureau of Standards, which will make sure that what we buy in our supermarkets, or anywhere for that matter, that they're safe. We are moving to guarantee that there's no room for inferior products to be sold in our market. We will be in a position to identify every molecule, hidden or otherwise, every chemical makeup of every product that enters our market and enters destined for our stomachs. We should be able to do the testing on those. Mr. Speaker, I didn't spend a lot of time on the bill. I spoke about how effective the department is going to be in administering this department strengthened by the bill. But to go to the bill, I am drawn to section part 2 of the bill, Mr. Speaker. Sections 9 and 10. The duty of, actually it's part 3, is it? Part 3. Yes, licenses for use of standard mark. The duty to act in a fair manner. And it's important to read that section, Mr. Speaker, because the Bureau of Standards has a duty to be fair, where the Bureau is required to make a decision respecting a refusal of an application for a grant of a license or the revocation of a license under this part, it must be done in a fair manner. And without limiting the generality of subsection 1, before the Bureau refuses to grant a license or revokes a license under the Act, the Bureau shall provide a written notice to the applicant or licensee of the intention of the Bureau to refuse and grant the license or to revoke the license. That is to give the person an opportunity to be heard, to understand what is taking place, what their shortcomings might be, and see if they can take corrective measures. And it goes on. And it is important for persons who will be applying to the Bureau for such licenses to appreciate how to go about getting a license and complying with the things that are required to give them the license. And then, of course, I'm also drawn, Mr. Speaker, to Section 16, because Section 16 speaks to standards mark. And here, 16 and 17 gives an opportunity for St. Christopher Navy standards mark and or a CARICOM standards mark. Now, I don't need to explain what that means, because if you have a CARICOM standard mark, which is administered and which is done by the Bureau of Standards here, what that means is it's practically safe passage anywhere through CARICOM, because it is at the standard set by CARICOM, which is applied by the Bureau in identifying and approving this standard mark. And that's what this does. It is removing barriers to trade. It is a facilitating trade taking place without too much inhibitions. And this is why this bill is so important, Mr. Speaker, because it gives authority, power, if you will, to the Bureau of Standards to be able to do these things so that our people who are growing, our agro-processors, those people who want to ship things abroad can get certified by the Bureau of Standards, knowing that their goods will have pretty straight passage to any of our member states and even to third-party states. Mr. Speaker, with those few words, I wish this bill safe passage to this honourable House. May it please you.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Christopher 8, Eugene Hamilton. I recognize the mover of the bill, Ms. to do her wrap.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to start off by extending grateful thanks to the Honourable Member for number 7 for his able support of the second reading, number 8, for the second reading of the bill shortly entitled the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021. The member for number 8 would have brought an additional perspective on the work of the Bureau of Standards, which time would not have allowed me to do, but which I intend to give a more fulsome hearing to, God willing, during the budget debate next month, as I give a report on the work of the Ministry of International Trade and its various departments. I'm grateful, however, for the notations he would have made relative to the good work, the breakthroughs that are taking place, the innovations that are taking place at the Bureau of Standards and the Multipurpose Laboratory, for which this legislation is rather critical in allowing the Bureau and basically untying its hands to be able to do more for the people of this country while advancing the quality infrastructure and culture we wish to see in everything and every sphere of endeavor within St. Kitts and Nevis. I am grateful in particular for the indication that the member for number 8 would have given in terms of some of the technological capabilities, in particular the equipment at the Bureau. Because on that note, I should indicate that the same machine that he was referring to as it relates to the determination of fish species using the example of wild-caught salmon is the same type of equipment that should be available at the Bureau within the first 3 months of 2022 as part of the ongoing improvements and services being provided. And that machine is really a molecular machine that will allow us to do genetic typing to determine, as he gave the example, fish species and other things. But then it has the additional benefit of assisting the government overall in terms of the provision of services in the area of the testing of COVID-19 samples should the need for such arise, because it is practically the same equipment that is already in place at the Jane France General Hospital Laboratory that would have been donated by the International Atomic Energy Agency. So it provides the government, by extension, with one extra capacity point in terms of laboratory services should the need arise for additional testing laboratory capability to be put in place, as would have been an issue that we would have been confronted with several weeks ago when we were inundated with cases and our laboratory system would have been backed up. So I wanted to bring that point. With those few words, Mr. Speaker, I now ask, with your leave, that this bill be read a second time and that we can move on to the committee stage of the bill.
The question is that the bill entitled Bureau of Standards Bill 2021 be read a second time. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to provide for the preparation, promotion, and implementation of standards and standard-related activities in relation to commodities, goods, services, processes, and practices, and to ensure quality through compliance with technical regulations where relevant, by the establishment and operation of a Bureau of Standards, to define the powers and functions of the Bureau of Standards, to provide for transitional provisions and for incidental matters, otherwise known as the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021.
The bill has been read a second time. The House moves into committee.
The arrangement of sections.
Mr. Chairman, it is to recommend the bill in the arrangement of section by renumbering the list of sections as follows. And that is on section 40. Copyright of St. Christopher Nevis Standards. 41, impersonation. 42, tampering with seized articles. 43, court may impose additional penalty. 44, forfeiture of articles and conviction of offenders. 45, appeals. 46, evidence of standard. 47, secrecy of information. 48, protection against claims. You know, note, Mr. Chairman, that in the body of the bill, that is how these are set up. But in the arrangements at the front, they're out of whack.
Thank you. The question is that the bill, as amended, or the section as amended, stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, the proposed in clause 1 to replace the clause as follows. 1, short title and commencement. This act may be cited as the Bureau of Standards and Quality Bill and shall come into operation on such date as the Minister may, by order, appoint.
The question is that the title at section 1, clause 1, as amended, stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, it's proposed in clause 2 to amend it 1 by inserting in the correct alphabetical order the following expressions. Controller means the control of customs. Inspector means a person appointed by the minister pursuant to section 24(1) and sub 2 in the definition of the expression test equipment by inserting immediately after the expression Caribbean Regional Organization for Standards and Quality the expression CROSQ, C-R-O-S-Q.
Thank you. The question is that clause 2, as amended, stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clauses 3 through 16.
The question is that clauses 3 through 16 stand part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 17, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, it is proposed to amend clause 17 by replacing the expression board with the expression bureau.
The question is that clause 17, as amended, stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clauses 18 through 44.
The question is that clauses 18 through 244 stand part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 45.
Mr. Chairman, it is proposed to amend the bill in clause 45 by replacing the subsection 2 as follows. 2. Subject to subsection 3, an appeal shall lie, A, from the decision of the Bureau to the Minister, B, from the decision of the Minister to the High Court, C, from the decision of the High Court to the Court of Appeal.
The question is that clause 45, as amended, stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 46.
46, clause 46. The question is that clause 46 stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clause 47.
The question is,
Mr. Chairman.
sorry,
It is
proceed.
proposed that
47.
in clause 47, that it be amended by inserting immediately after the expression formula, the expression trade secrets.
The question is that clause 47, as amended, should I continue?
That's in subsection 2.
So if the word formula is in sections 1 and 2, so in both sections,
Yeah, in both sections where it is,
that's a proposed amendment. Yes,
should add in the term, the expression
yes,
trade secrets.
yes. The question is that clause 47, as amended, that is by inserting the word trade secrets after the word formula in both sections,
Yes.
stand part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
Clauses 48 through 52.
The question is that clauses 48 through 52 stand part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
The schedule.
The question is that the schedule stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes have it.
The enacting clause.
The question is that the enacting clause stands part of the bill. Those in favor?
Aye.
Those against? The ayes or the ayes have it. Your choice.
The title.
The question is,
Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
sorry.
It is proposed to amend the title, the Bureau of Standards Bill 2020 as follows, by replacing it with the expression Bureau of Standards and Quality Bill 2021.
Okay, so that's a significant amendment, I would think.
That's right.
Yes,
It's
yes.
Standards Bureau of Standards right now, but we want to change it with the expression Bureau of Standards and Quality Bill. County Bureau of
Yes,
Standards.
yes,
so we
understood,
said
understood.
And Bureau of Standards
Yes.
and Quality Bill.
The question is that the title of the bill is amended to read Bureau of Standards and Quality Bill 2021. Those in favor? Those against? The ayes have it. House resumes. Honourable move of the bill, Minister Wendy Phipps.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am happy to report that the bill would have gone through committee stage with various amendments as outlined in the two-page circular that was provided to all members. And after concurrence on each of these amendments, I now ask that the bill be read a third time and passed.
The question is that the bill entitled the Bureau of Standards and Quality Bill 2021 be read a third time and passed. Those in favor? Aye. Those against? The ayes have it.
A bill to provide for the preparation, promotion, and implementation of standards and standard-related activities in relation to commodities, goods, services, processes, and practices, and to ensure quality through compliance with technical regulations where relevant, by the establishment and operation of a Bureau of Standards to define the powers and functions of the Bureau of Standards, to provide for transitional provisions and for incidental matters, otherwise known as the Bureau of Standards Bill 2021.
The bill has been read a third time. That is the Bureau of Standards and Quality Bill 2021, and passed.
Next item.
Motions, resolutions, adjournment.
Mr. Speaker, I rise with your leave again and seek to get the House's permission to adjourn sine die. And in doing so, Mr. Speaker, I noticed that you're wearing a poppy. And so am I. And it's important to make note, Mr. Speaker, that on Sunday coming, there will be the observance of the gift of life of those from our nation who have been in both World War I and II, and their service is being honored on Sunday. The usual 8 o'clock service, and we expect persons in our country to pay attention and to observe that hour with us, even if you're not at the War Memorial. It's important, Mr. Speaker, because some 26 of our individuals, of our persons, of our nationals did lose their life. 20 of them in World War I and 6 of them in World War II. And while they may be read, Mr. Speaker, on Sunday, since I've raised the point, I hope you would not mind if I read the names of those 26 persons. In World War I, 1914 to 1918, just about a little over 100 years ago, Joseph Cephas, James Daniel, Arthur Dickinson, Donald Edwards, MC, H.D. Edwards, DSO, John Foreman, Edmund Gordon, H. Herbert Jones, James L.E.R. Lake, Joseph Lewis, Joseph McCoy, Edward Mills, Herbert Michel, Donald Patrice, Edward Hope Ross, Horace Vera, Williams C. Watley, Richard White, Robert Woolward, Ivor Wakefield, and in the War of 1939-1945, J.E. Alves, DFM, Peter Berkeley, Sidney DeVille, A.E. Ferrara, G.G.H. Ferrara, DFC, DFM, and Bassett Vera, DFC. So on Sunday, Mr. Speaker, I would hope that everyone will observe the contribution of these great stalwarts who have given their life in both World War I and World War II. May it please, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on the adjournment to express sympathies to persons in my constituency, especially someone who was very dear to me as my advisor who was laid to rest, Anthony Johnson. Again, I express sympathies to his family and even to the Chico families at Ponds Pasture. In a moment, I'll be joining them for the funeral. Additionally, Mr. Speaker, I want to commend the Newtown Masters football champions. This was an activity organized as an independent celebration, and there was a football competition held in the constituency. I think it was organized by the Ministry of Empowerment, and the teams that won were charged to make sure that the donations are used in the various communities. And I'm pleased with the donation that the Masters football champions, Newtown, made a contribution to the Tucker Clark Primary School, assisting the school in completing a project that I started in the summer. I offered a skill, lay a tile and make a child smile. Learn a skill, lay a tile, make a child smile. And over the summer I was able to tile 3 classrooms. Now that we had the donation from the football club, they are going to complete the other 2 classrooms. So at the Tucker Clark, you would have the entire hall outfitted or renovated with the floor being tiled, and I want to thank them for their partnership, and I use this opportunity to encourage similar groups, organizations in the constituency to come on board with these projects as we are developing the community. So I just thought I should use this opportunity to publicly thank them. Additionally, the president of the St. Kitts Nevis Football Association and his executive also made a donation to the students there that same morning, and I want to thank them as well, because their little gestures are making big roads in the lives of our youth, and I am here to assist in any way possible to make sure that the young people in particular move in the right direction. May it please you, Honorable Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member for St. Christopher Warden, Dr. Jeffrey Henley. I recognize Government Senator Dr. Bernice Nisbet.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on the adjournment to publicly thank the representatives from the SCANIPA who were here this morning for today's sitting. As we know, this month is the month designated to celebrate the achievements of the young people of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. I will now like to take this time to express my sincerest condolences to the family members of Mr. Simon Grant from St. Paul's, who passed away just about 2 weeks ago. Mr. Grant was a dear patient of mine. I will also like to extend my sincerest sympathies to the Swanston family out of Diakbe for their loss. The late Miss Edith Swanston was taken away from us as a result of the COVID-19. It's a shock to many and a hard blow to the family. So again, I want to extend my comforting arms and supporting arms to the family during their time of bereavement. And with that, I want to appeal again to the public, to those who are not vaccinated, to please join the cause to help us fight against this COVID-19 virus. I want you to reconsider your stance and make that decision to be a part of this fight. And to remind the general public, vaccinated and unvaccinated, to continue to follow the public health protocols in wearing your mask correctly, social distancing, and to wash and hand sanitize your hands frequently. With that, Mr. Speaker, I shall sit.
Thank you, Senator Nisbet. I recognize Senator Opposite, Dr. Joel Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your permission, I rise for three things. One, to also add with the Senator on the government side in extending condolences to the families of the grants in St. Paul's, and also to the Swanstons, my family members. Mrs. Swanston is actually the sister of my grandfather, my last remaining grandparents. So it is indeed a very difficult loss. Especially, I want to say to Sandra Swanston, our family member, that we are all here to support her again in her time of bereavement. Last year, around this time, we were here and I made mention of November and the importance of November as it relates to November 25th, when we will be meeting for the Remarkable Teens Award. It is also the day in which we recognize it's the International Day Against Gender-Based Violence, and it is the signaling of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. And so I make another impassioned plea for all of us to wear our purple, wear our orange for those 16 days in support of the end of gender-based violence. The only way we will move forward in addressing this issue, and recently we saw evidence, we were all horrified by the brutal murder of another female. It says that we have very far to go in terms of building awareness and educating our young men and women about signs and experiences as it relates to gender-based violence. So let's all work together on this in particular. Finally, I want to congratulate all the students, both registered with high schools and registered with outside of high schools, for their recent performance in the CXC exams. It was a difficult year, we all know this. The students who sat the CXC exams this year in particular have been experiencing at least 2 years of interruptions and adjustments due to COVID-19, and that they were able to get to the end of this academic journey with CXC and sit their exams and still come out very successfully. We ought to applaud them and recognize them. Importantly, for Keon High School, we again did really well at our CXCs, but more significantly, we are celebrating 50 years of existence as a high school, and this school proudly boasts the clerk of the house, Mrs. Sonia Badisari, and of course, Dr. Nisbet, and most importantly, our Prime Minister. The school will be reaching out to everyone to support us, to come and speak to the students, remind them of the importance of our motto, non multa sed multa. It is not quantity, but quality. So congratulations to Keon High School on 50 years.
Thank you, Senator. I recognize the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas, member for St. Christopher 6.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On behalf of the people of constituency number 6, and in particular the people of Deep Bay, I want to extend as well condolences, in particular to the Swanston family. As you would have heard from both senators, yet again the Swanston family is in mourning. You will recall only a few months ago we mourned the loss of Ethel Swanston, one of the pioneers in the St. Kitts Nevis Anguilla National Bank. Must have been very painful for her own mom, who is now 85 years old, I think, to have seen her depart. And now her mom herself has departed. And so we want to assure both two daughters who have remained. We have, of course, Eslyn and Eslyn's own two children, two boys, two young men, I should say. We have, of course, Sandra, who has been very close to me, in particular, over the last few years. Worked for many years in the land sales company, has now been home, been let off for almost 2 years. I can imagine how painful it is for her, unable to find work, and now has to be part in the mourning of her grandmother and her own aunt a few months ago, with whom she has lived. I know what it is like in that family, especially at this time. I also want to call our attention to the loss of Simon Grant. Mr. Grant returned from England with his wife, Rosalind Bradshaw, one of the well-established families in St. Paul's. You will recall that a few years ago, Rosalind lost her life under very difficult circumstances. And now her husband, Simon, has departed. These were two people in particular who were very close to the St. Kitts Nevis Labour Party. Mrs. Swanston herself was one of the stalwarts of our movement. And so today I lead the communities and the constituency into deep mourning for these losses. May their souls rest in peace, and may those who leave to mourn their loss, let us remember them in our prayers. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Douglas. I recognize the Honourable Mark Brantley, member for Nevis 9.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on this occasion on the adjournment of this National Assembly to extend firstly my congratulations to the members of the St. Kitts Nevis Youth Parliamentary Group that was here, SCANIPA I think that they're called. I've had the occasion to interact with them, and I'm very impressed with the work that they've done and continue to do. In fact, I think that many who have come through this Parliament have benefited from the work of the youth parliamentarians. They are, of course, the individuals that we expect to occupy these benches in due course, and certainly we would want to wish them all the very best. Mr. Speaker, it is unusual for me to rise and speak on the adjournment, but I thought it important to join my voice to the voices of the others who have expressed such sorrow on the loss of loved ones and individuals in the community who would have impacted us all. I confess that I do not know personally some that have been spoken to by other speakers before me. However, I would want to specifically mention my friend, Mr. Johnson, Anthony Johnson, who was a lawyer of long standing, and who, as a boy in high school, I used to stay at his family home. If I recall, it was on East Park Range. And he and his brother Winston have been friends of mine for a very, very long time. In fact, if memory serves, his mother was from Nevis. And, Mr. Speaker, it came as a shock. I recall that I had seen Anthony just
a week or so prior to the sudden news of his passing. And I was moved to say something because it is demonstrative of what we have continued to say, that none of us knows the day nor the hour. And it behooves all of us, therefore, to live a life that shows that we are prepared for that inevitable end. I really would want to express my condolences to the family, especially my brother Winston, to indicate to them that the loss of this young lawyer is a loss, I think, that has been felt across the Federation, and that Anthony, while a lawyer, would have made an indelible mark on football as well, where I know he participated at the highest levels of the administration of football for many years. And so on a personal note, Mr. Speaker, I wanted to use this occasion to celebrate his life and to extend condolences to his family. While I'm on my feet, let me also express my deepest condolences to two families in Nevis, the Farrell family on the one hand and the Howell family on the other. The Farrell family, because they've lost a young man, I think he was called Shaheem, who unfortunately was a recent homicide that we recorded on the island of Nevis. I gather that he was the only child of his mother and was cut down in the prime of his youth. In fact, if I may use this opportunity to share a personal note, is that my own daughter, my younger daughter, indicated to me that she and this youngster went through their school lives together and that they competed aggressively with each other for first place. And when I heard his eulogy read at his funeral, I was truly saddened to see such a bright youngster cut down in this way, because in the eulogy they said that he passed 9 subjects, and when he got his results, his remark to his mother, well, I wonder what would have happened if I had studied, because he had that natural ability. And when we see youngsters like these who hold such promise cut down, I think that we have to take note, and our society has to stand up and condemn unreservedly such acts of violence. And that same fateful night, we lost a youngster who worked with us in the Nevis Island administration, Xavier Howell. And young Xavier was out with his friend, and both were cut down on that fateful night on the beach in Nevis. Xavier was a fun-loving youngster, someone who was excellent with graphics and anything to do with videography. And he worked with us and has produced a lot of what we have seen on television on Nevis. And so I would want to extend to his mother, Cavell, his dad, Patrick, my deepest condolences. And if that were not enough, the Howell family would have lost now Spencer Howell, whom we all know in Nevis as a stalwart, somebody who was involved in all aspects of the life and times of our island of Nevis. But I would know him best as a man who was intricately involved in the sport of horse racing on the island of Nevis. And so this Howell family has had the tragedy of young Xavier being cut down again in the flower of his youth, and now the loss as well of the patriarch of the family in Mr. Spencer Howell. And so I did not want this occasion to pass, Mr. Speaker, without conveying to those families in Nevis that are mourning my deepest condolences as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Brantley. I recognize the Honourable Sean Richards, member for St. Christopher 5.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too take the opportunity on this, the adjournment of the National Assembly, to extend condolences to the family members of 3 persons who, in my view, have in their own right made a significant contribution to the development of this federation.
The first family that I extend condolences to is that of Mrs. Maureen Woodley of Sandy Point. Mrs. Woodley spent the majority of her working years as a teacher. She would have taught at the then Epworth School, which later was renamed the Morris Hillier Memorial School. Apart from working at that particular institution, she also would have served within the Methodist community as a lay preacher. As a matter of fact, at one point in time, she would have been the leader for my class at the Sandy Point Methodist Church. I, in particular, extend condolences to her 3 children. You have Terence Woodley, a clerk at TDC. You have Dr. Joylette Woodley, who has worked within the medical profession here in St. Kitts and Nevis, and her other son, Mr. Roger Woodley, who also has been working in the education fraternity for a number of years. He is the immediate past principal of the Virtuals High School and now serves as one of our chief education officers. I now turn to the family members of the late Austin Natter or Saltfish Warner, as some persons would know him. Mr. Warner would be known by persons for different things. He worked with the then SSMC, and after the closure of SSMC, he was self-employed. He did painting, and he also did barbecue quite regularly on Fridays and Saturdays, at first in the Mount Idle area of Sandy Point, and then he would have moved closer to the Crab Hill, Pedro Street area. Mr. Warner, for quite a number of years, also served as a captain within the Boys Brigade, and so in that respect, he would have helped to mold quite a number of young persons who would have passed through that particular organization. He also served as a sexton within the Methodist Church. I am certain that a number of the schools here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis are also mourning the passing of Mr. Warner, as each and every sport day he would have led a contingent from the Boys Brigade as the schools undertook their march past for their various sports days. And you're correct, the member for number 1 has reminded me that for the annual youth summer camp, he was more or less a staple at those summer camps. As a matter of fact, I've seen a statement issued by the youth department extending condolences to his family, and he basically giving thanks for the service that he rendered year after year at those camps. Thirdly, Mr. Speaker, I extend condolences to the family of the late Mr. Stuart Knight. Mr. Stuart Knight, Mr. Speaker, is one of the founding members, or was one of the founding members of the National Young Pamites. Hence, when one looks at the political development here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, he would have contributed greatly to that particular aspect of our development. Again, Mr. Speaker, I extend my own condolences, that of the entire constituency of Sandy Point, and certainly on behalf of the People's Action Movement to the family members of those who are left to mourn the passing of those 3 particular individuals. May it please you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for number Number 5, St. Christopher 5, Honorable Sean Richards. Honourable members, the question is that this Honourable House stands adjourned sine die. Those in favour? Those against? The ayes have it. This Honourable House stands adjourned sine die.
A long time ago in Bethlehem, so the Holy Bible say,